Well, suffice to say, it has been quite a while, hasn't it, Super Mario 64 DS? But with a slight of a twist to it, because remember back in Journey Evolves Within sometime in May, that Lola Bunny did somehow already tackle through a ROM hack of Mario Kart DS called Pony Kart DS, right? Well, here we are in turns the forms of another Super Mario 3D, a ROM hack of Super Mario 64 DS. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, it is I am the one and only Tiana here, and I'm of course from the likes of the Mexi Toys videos here, and ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our next new Let's Play for the channel, and this time we're going into yet another ROM hack of a DS game of all things, this time around with Super Mario 64 DS, which, to put it simply, as you can tell, we are experiencing another Super Mario 3D. Now, as far as I'm aware, this particular ROM hack has been made by Scolo, I think it was, although ultimately though, it was actually by the forms of the same creative team, who is also responsible for the sake of the forms of not only newer Super Mario Bros. Wii, back in Journey Evolves Within 2013, but in addition to newer Super Mario Bros. On the DS as well. So generally speaking, I was about the fact I'm very excited able to check that particular ROM hack out during at some point later on, for the sake of the forms of trying to able to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the Super Mario Bros. Franchise, as we expect at this point. So, actually, as a matter of fact, we've only just got about 2 months away, just before, you know, Nintendo decides they're able to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the Super Mario Bros. So because of that though, yeah, I'm super excited once that time comes, enjoying at some point in September to be more specifically. So for now on though, it's about the fact that we're still on July of course, which I'll explain more details about that if we dive into this particular Let's Play itself. So because of that, yeah, just like the forms of how it does it in Super Mario 64 DS, that thanks to Sonic the Hedgehog did already tackle for that game, since technically in 2021, for the sake of the forms of redoing that particular game. So relatively speaking, I was about the fact that obviously if you couldn't tell, this is going to be the, as we expected, the fully 100% completion playthrough. So because of that though, but there's one or couple of things has been changed compared to the forms of how it does it on the actual Super Mario 64 DS as a game itself. Like for one thing, as far as I'm aware, I did manage able to test out the Versus mode, and for whatever reason the game crashed. So because of that though, I'm afraid to tell you we can't shut that off. And second of all, I don't think we can able to actually unlock some of these Rec Room games anymore. So we are basically just only stuck with the forms of 2 of those particular games each catalog, for specifically for Yoshi's minigames, Mario's minigames, Luigi minigames, and Wario minigames, making a grand total of only 8 of those particular Rec Room minigames. So because of that though, I don't think there's any point we can able to show this off anyway, just because if you've already seen our Let's Play of Super Mario 64 DS already, then I highly recommend you able to check it out if that particular video is about to end anyway. So, I digress. So similar to the forms of how it does it on Super Mario 64 DS, the actual vanilla version of the game, basically though is about the fact that, as you can tell, we are about to be take control of the forms of Yoshi to start things off, just like the forms of Super Mario 64 DS, because as far as I'm aware, that Mario, Luigi, and Wario especially have once again got locked up in the actual 2 doors or anything else like that. So, but, as you can tell, the environment itself looks a bit different this time around in terms of the forms of this ROM hack anyway, because instead of taking place during the forms within the Mushroom Kingdom for the sake of the forms of Princess Peach's Castle, the most iconic hub world in terms of every single 3D Mario games for that point, which, gee, specifically until next year, that Super Mario 64 as a game itself is going to be eventually became 30 years old until next year. So because of that though, man, time flies, you know. And in addition to that though, it's about the fact that the actual hub itself is also a lot different this time around too. Although we still need to able to actually collect some more power stars as we expect at this point. However, do you guys even remember in the actual Super Mario 64 DS game, right, that there was only like whopping 150 power stars in order to able to go for 400% completion? Well, in this ROM hack anyway, decides to able to double it down, and as a result, the maximum amount of stars you can only get up to this time around, which appears to be 73 power stars, which is a little bit odd number, but I'll explain more details about that, because as you can tell, we're about to jump into the first stage of this ROM hack, and this stage, what appears to be called Tree Trunk Meadow, and as you can tell, similar to the forms of how it does it on Super Mario 64 DS, that we can still able to actually experience 7 missions, including with the forms of the 100 coin Power Star mission as well. So as to be expected, that was about the fact that, like I said before, this is going to be a 400% completion playthrough, just to let you guys know. It was also reassuring about this too, that originally though, that Jewel was supposed to able to actually go on to WarioWare DIY Showcase during at some point in this upcoming weekend, but I'm afraid to tell you is about the fact that unfortunately though, Jewel has suffered the forms of cold recently, so because of that though, I'm afraid to tell you is about the fact that the last few parts of WarioWare DIY Showcase is going to be delayed during at some point until next week. So because of that though, for the time being though, we're most able to stick around with only one game for now, or to be more accurate though, a ROM hack of Super Mario 64 DS as it is. So with that being said, oh, this is interesting. So, relatively speaking though, we can still able to actually wear familiar caps like Mario cap, and eventually the Luigi cap and the Wario cap as well, during at some point in the later missions to come. Now, as you can definitely tell, right off the bat though, is about the fact that the level design is actually like almost entirely brand new, which I was like, this does look pretty cool in my first impressions, especially considering about the fact that this has been made by the same team who is responsible for, you know, newer Super Mario Bros. Wii, in addition to newer Super Mario Bros. DS as well. So relatively speaking, I was about the fact that my expectations of this ROM hack is actually very high, especially considering about the fact that, well, as to be expected, I'm also able to actually go for traditional controls, like specifically the D-pad with the forms of B to jump, and, you know, trying to run with the Y button, of course, just like the forms of how it does it on the, you know, Super Mario 64 DS, what you expect. But there's absolutely no way in heck for me to try to utilize the touchscreen controls during the forms of the actual gameplay, because it'll make platforming very awkward with touchscreen in mind. So, anyways though, so yeah, a few things I want to talk about this is though, and that's what appears to be for the fact that, well, today's date of course here is the 7th of July today, in some cases in 2025 today, so no matter what though, only 10 more days to go around that time with this particular recording session has been done. Obviously though, 10 more days to go until Donkey Kong Bonanza for the Nintendo Switch 2 is going to be releasing, so in addition to that, I believe there was actually an overview trailer for that game already, not only in Japan, but as well as the English version as well. Although, mind you though, it's a little bit redundant, just because we've already got ourselves the actual Nintendo Direct focused on Donkey Kong Bonanza ever since around a couple of weeks back. So no matter what though, is about the fact I'm pretty sure most of these information are basically exactly the same as the forms of how it does it on the actual Direct, focusing on, you know, Donkey Kong Bonanza. So that's besides the point. So anyway, also, as far as I realize about this, is about the fact that the majority of the worlds of this ROM hack is actually a lot smaller in comparison to the forms of how it does it on the actual Super Mario 64 DS game itself. I mean, relatively speaking, I was about the fact that for the most part though, the first world is actually pretty self-explanatory, but of course, just like the forms of how it does it on the actual Super Mario 64 DS in mind, that I don't think it's possible we can able to actually gather every single Power Stars in that particular single session, so as a result, this means we need able to actually once again try to unlock not only Mario, but in addition to Luigi and Wario as well. So because of that though, now, as far as I'm aware, there's also some other changes for the sake of the forms this ROM hack was not exist, unlike the forms of how it does it on the actual Super Mario 64 DS game itself. Like, for one thing, there are no catching rabbits this time around, so this means about the fact that we don't have to necessarily try to worry about trying to able to keep on finding the shiny variations of those rabbits, of course, not able to actually unlock the secret door, which pretty much gives us the ability to have a actual Power Star. So, relatively speaking, I was about the fact I'm pretty sure that the multicolored rabbits is also not showing up in this ROM hack either, because like I said before, it's about the fact that when it comes to the actual Rec Room mode, basically though, we are basically stuck around with the forms of only roughly 8 minigames to play around with, which I'm pretty sure the actual minigames themselves plays exactly the same as the forms of how it does on the actual Super Mario 64 DS game, believe it or not. So either way, let's see if I can get myself into... Oh, nice! And the fact that no matter what though, no need for the actual cannon or anything else like that. Well, at least to be more specifically until the next few worlds coming up, so anyway. Oh, and speaking of which, in terms of the forms of Nintendo Switch 2 stuff, that's what it appears to be for the fact that I'm pretty sure that we've only got about 17 more days to go until Super Mario Party Jamboree Nintendo Switch 2 edition with the Jamboree TV is going to be releasing as well. So hopefully though, that'll be about it in terms of the forms of July software of games that we consider trying to be getting for the majority of this month anyway, for the likes of in July anyway. And in addition to that though, is about the fact that only 4 more days to go until Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 plus 4 for the majority of any other platforms, including Nintendo Switch, Nintendo Switch 2, despite the fact that, you know, it's going to be download code only, instead of the forms of the actual physical game card. And I'm like, that's a bit redundant, don't you think? And speaking of which though, is about the fact that I've also found out that another one of those games has been revealed for Nintendo Switch 2. And that's what appears to be something related to WWE kind of game, which I'll talk more about that in a second, because as far as I've also realized about the fact that one of those games, usually for the sake of the forms of Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour, at least as far as I do realize, about the fact that, did you guys know about the fact that the developer who was responsible for able to actually making Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour was actually, believe it or not, is the actual exact same developer who also did Super Mario Party Jamboree, not only for Nintendo Switch 1, but as well as potentially with Nintendo Switch 2 version as well. And believe it or not, the responsible for that is of course Nintendo Cube. So as a result, that's quite intriguing, all things considered, despite the fact that, relatively speaking of that, you know, Super Mario Party Jamboree has been out for about almost entirely a year ago, since, you know, last year's October, so that's besides the point. So, and of course, as we expected, since that we're now on to the red coin missions, as far as I'm aware, that we're also trying to go after the 100 coin Power Star mission as well. So because of that though, again, sometimes it takes a bit of a while, especially just trying to able to actually figure out the new level layout and everything, especially considering about the fact I've seen a lot of playthroughs like this in the past, especially that I have some high expectations to able to actually try out this ROM hack out. So relatively speaking though, everything else checks out there for the most part. Although, I'm afraid to tell you for this point guys, is about the fact that unfortunately though, we're about to come across into some of these very unpredictable enemy patterns sometimes, I must admit. Not only for the sake of the forms of the majority of the Goombas sometimes, because again, if I dare jump at one point, and then it's hard for me to explain personally, because we already know for a fact it's been about, you know, 4 years ago since we've last experienced Super Mario 64 DS, because I have no idea that for some reason I keep on used to playing the original Super Mario 64, not for the sake of the forms of the original cartridge version, but in addition to the, you know, Nintendo Wii Virtual Console version, and even nowadays with the forms of Super Mario 3D All-Stars, which is actually based off from the Shindu Pack edition. And on top of that, also I did manage to try out the American version and the Japanese original release. So because of that though, just because no matter what though, you're most able to find out more about it, probably at some point later down the road. So yeah, that's besides the point. So anyway, so there's also another thing else I would like to explain to you all for something, and that's what it appears to be for the fact that, remember how when Maxi did somehow manage able to point out that yes, we got some more DVDs just recently, and as a matter of fact, we actually did manage to got 2 more DVDs, which I'm about to tell you for this point right now, both of which are very underrated to me though, and that's what it appears to be both a Goofy movie, and in addition to Space Jam, the original film, because, well, to be honest with you guys, I'm honestly not a big fan of the forms of the sequel, which appears to be A New Legacy, just because it just feels a bit slightly off to me. I know it's a bit updated in terms of visuals, but it's just that it feels more actually like a product placement kind of, aspect or something like that in regards to the forms of Space Jam and New Legacy, because well, there might be still some product placement was found in the original film, but it's a guilty pleasure of mine, especially because no matter what though, it was actually pretty cool thing at the time, despite the fact that the visual effects look a bit weird at times when it comes to the forms of several of those slapstick humor, especially because of all that, well, trying to convert those human characters into this little slapstick comedy visual effects, and that just feels a bit, I don't know, kind of jarring, and I know it's a bit dated too, with all these visuals in mind, but I will still say that while looking back in the forms of the original Space Jam, all things considered, that the visuals on the majority of the Looney Tune characters still holds up even to this day, despite, you know, like I said before, sometimes it feels a bit dated at times. Well, it's not too noticeable, I don't think. Well, because of that, though, I just want to care for not only Looney Tunes, but also Tiny Toons nowadays, because, you know, with all their chaotic moments, with all that Warner Brothers in mind. So, anyway, and as far as Goofy Movie is concerned, the first film specifically, I actually still managed to really enjoy it, even to this day, despite the fact that it's already been out for quite some time on Disney+, so it's nice to have the physical version anyway, just for the sake of the films of one of those moments where the fact I can watch the film anywhere I go, without needing to worry about the forms of trying to keep on activating the forms of the actual subscription for Disney+ services, so, but I digress. So, back to what I was saying about the forms of one of those WWE games has already been confirmed for Nintendo Switch 2. That's what it appears to be, none other than WWE 2K25 Nintendo Switch 2 version, despite it doesn't say Nintendo Switch 2 edition, but that's besides the point. And as far as I'm aware, I'm afraid to tell you that the physical version of that game, it sadly is going to be yet another one of those games is going to be only on downloadable code rather than just the forms of the game cards themselves. So no matter what though, we are officially out of luck in regards to the forms of trying to get the majority of the forms of those, you know, third-party supportive games for Nintendo Switch 2, which is just such a shame, honestly, because, you know, every nowadays, especially with Switch 1 games especially as well, like, for instance, though, with the forms of, well, it's hard for me to explain personally, though, because, well, relatively speaking, it has been quite a while since I actually have last played myself with the forms of the, you know, Nintendo Switch 1, in addition to Nintendo Switch 2, just because at this point in time, about the fact that the weather itself is once again about to get not only warmer, but in addition to a little bit hotter as well at the same time. I mean, relatively speaking though, we're still in summer of course, but I'm still very, very, very excited able to actually just try to go ahead and try out, you know, Donkey Kong Bonanza once that game comes out on Nintendo Switch 2, so yeah, everything else checks out there. So there goes our 100 coin Power Star mission in this particular tree trunk meadow level. So anyway, so now we need to go after the yet another Power Star on the top of the actual tree itself. I mean, yeah, for the most part, this level is very self-explanatory, and I'm generally surprised that we've never actually come across into a boss fight in the earliest point of this ROM hack right from the start, because unlike in, you know, Super Mario 64 DS, including Super Mario 64 on the actual Nintendo 64, basically though you always have to come across into King Bob-omb or Big Bob-omb back in the day as a first boss fight. So either way, there goes not one but two Power Stars in a singular mission, so nicely done and everything. Although I would have wished if I was trying to able to save it for later, but it's so likely for the future levels to come, then obviously though we'll try our best able to actually try to unlock, you know, every single playable characters as much as we could. So either way, back to the actual first world as we go, and let's move on to the next mission right here. So either way, because like I said before, several worlds, as far as I'm aware, only has like 7 missions to go through, and in addition to, you know, the 100 coin Power Star mission as well. So speaking of the stages in general though, I do realize about the fact that in this particular ROM hack in mind, this ROM hack only contains 7 main worlds in addition to 10 secret stages. So because of that though, expecting to believe about the fact that this playthrough is not going to be that long compared to the forms of how it does it on the Super Mario 64 DS as a game itself, by the way. So yeah, you probably get the idea about the fact that how the length itself is going to turn out to be. Because, you know, unlike in, you know, Super Mario 64 DS, there's only like 15 main worlds in addition to a couple of those secret courses here and there as well. So just to ensure for the fact that you can try to get used to with the character's specific abilities and all that jazz. So yeah, for the most part, we now on to the next mission, which looks a bit familiar to you, and that's, of course, hunting down for those familiar silver stars, which, once again, we do need to obtain 5 of them, because once you obtain all 5 of those silver stars, the regular power star has now appeared in the actual glass container. Although, if you get hit and then lose the silver star, obviously, though, the star will disappear, and you have to specifically try to grab the silver star again, so just in case it will reappear again. So, you know, kind of like the forms of how it does it in, you know, that was around that time before when Super Mario Galaxy, as well as Super Mario Galaxy 2 was a thing, of course. So, anyways, though, so let's go ahead and try to able to actually... Although I will admit, though, right away, it is kind of hard for me sometimes to try to get used to with the actual camera controls again, because I'm still pretty much used to with the forms of, you know, the C buttons on the normal version of Super Mario 64, and in addition to that, though, with the analog controls to the sake of the forms of the 3D All-Stars version for, you know, taking control of the camera and all that. So in here, though, I have to specifically try to press the L button in order able to change the camera's perspective. So, anyway, so that being said, let's move on to the next mission, which involves around we need to exterminate every single piranha plant in this entire environment. So, yeah, that sounds familiar to you. Especially notable if you ever experienced Tiny Huge Island before. Basically, that was about the fact that if you see those butterflies decide able to fly around in the actual stage itself, that actually signifies about the fact that that's where the huge the piranha plants is going to be located. So, for the most part, though, it's about the fact that once you deal with all 5 of them, to be more specific, then obviously, though, the power star is yours to obtain. So, but anyway, oh, in addition to that, though, speaking of the forms of Donkey Kong Bonanza, well, we were right. After all this time, after a lot of speculation in terms of the forms of the actual development team, as far as we do realize, is that Donkey Kong Bonanza has officially got the actual development team. And who's responsible for that? Well, it's actually made by the same development team as the one and only Super Mario Odyssey, because we did call that ever since in Journey informs it around a couple of days back, just because we keep on hinting about something, not only for the sake of the forms of the user interface, but in addition to that, though, with the forms of a smooth 60 frames per second, and in addition to that, though, familiar camera angles when you talk to some NPCs, and in addition to that, though, Pauline is actually speaking, or in some cases, singing for that matter, in some of these scenarios. So, yeah, you can totally get the idea about the forms of Donkey Kong Bonanza is going to be almost inspired by Super Mario Odyssey, because, you know, it's been made by the same development team, for the sake of the forms of, let's just say, Nintendo's Entertainment Planning and Development, or in some cases EPD. So as a result, though, yeah, it's definitely going to be one of those familiar developers who actually has some bit of a similar premise when it comes to the forms of the user interface and all that stuff. So, yeah, that seems pretty cool and everything. So, anyway, and I'm afraid to tell you for this point, guys, is about the fact that sadly, though, 3 of those app games in particular, not only for Sonic the Hedgehog CD, but in addition to Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1, as well as Episode 2, all on the forms of the iPhone devices, or smartphones in general, those games, sadly, have been delisted recently, which I did manage to double check in Journey forms of my App Store recently, and no matter what though, those games are forever gone. And no matter what though, good thing I've already still got them, but it's just about the fact that for those of you who are the newcomers out there, well, unfortunately though, gonna miss those out, especially in Sonic CD's case, because, well, the only option we've got left for able to experience Sonic CD nowadays, in terms of remastered version of the game nowadays, is of course, Sonic Origins compilation, because that was the only option for you now, in terms of trying to able to actually play through Sonic CD remastered version, likely on the PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X/S, PC Steam, Nintendo Switch, in addition to, technically, Nintendo Switch 2, all thanks to backwards compatibility, despite there's no upgrade pack for Switch 2 or anything. So, yeah, that's what I've got for this point. So because of that, though, yeah, it kind of sucks, honestly, because relatively speaking, I still managed able to find myself really enjoy playing through Sonic CD quite a number of times, specifically on the remastered version of the game, likely on the smartphones, and in addition to the Xbox 360 download and the PlayStation 3 download as well, despite the fact that, well, obviously those versions are also not available anymore, because, you know, that particular version as a standalone game has now been delisted, all thanks to the forms of the Sonic Origins existence. So, oh well, beggars can't be choosers, I guess, unfortunately. So either way, so I believe that pretty much does it for now in terms of the forms of the first world of this ROM hack. So now let's move on to the, presumably speaking of, onto the next level as we go. Because after all, we actually got about quite enough power stars in order able to actually access to the next area. So, and I'm very curious to know what the next area is going to take place, I wonder. Well, I can definitely tell for sure it's going to take place in the caverns this time around, so that's going to be interesting. And for this particular second course of the game, it's going to be called, well, if I can recall correctly, and that's what it appears to be for the fact that we're going into, Grimly Mall Cavern, which I think that's what the stage is called anyway. So of course, we can expect to actually just trying to go in and trying to avoid a lot of bottomless pits and stuff like that. So, I mean, for the most part, the first mission is self-explanatory. We have to activate that, and straight to the point, we can now able to obtain the regular Mega Mushroom, since in the forms of in New Super Mario Bros. On the DS, despite the fact that back in the forms of in the regular Super Mario 64 DS is obviously the exact same color as the forms of the regular Super Mushroom power-up in the 2D Mario games, but that's besides the point. So yeah, for the first mission on this course is pretty simple. It's about the fact you have to go from pipe to pipe, basically. And as a result, once you get enough height for that particular platform, as you saw, then you reach that particular power star, no problem. So anyway, now let's move on to the next mission, which I believe this one involves around. We have to navigate through the narrow path, which, oh boy, this is going to be interesting. Especially because considering about the fact that, well, again, I will try my best able to actually go for a no-death run, but if not, then at least I did try. So either way, let's just go ahead and jump, and dang it, I spoke too soon. Jeez, I can't jump from here either, so I'm guessing we have to go for that the normal method, or to be more accurate though, we have to go for that similar approach as in Super Monkey Ball, whatever you're trying to able to balance it out when it comes to narrow paths and everything. So yeah, to be expected at this point, so I'll let it be. So either way, but at least I did manage to try in order able to actually try to test out, to able to actually skip this entire sequence when it comes to more specifically trying to go for this narrow path anyway. Well, something tells me though is about the fact that this part is going to be quite treacherous, at least as far as we do realize. So, oh jeez, I think walking is going to be the best option rather than just trying to dash through this part, because otherwise if we dare dash through it while running, then we'll lose footing and we have to start this entire process again. So, oh Christ, oh, okay. I guess changing the camera angles should help as well. And there we go. Oh, jeez. I'm probably not going to do that particular mission again, because otherwise, though, it reminds me of so much of experiencing Master Mode in the original Super Monkey Ball, or Monkey Ball on the arcade, at least as far as we do realize. So, anyway, now let's move on to the next mission, which I believe, for this particular mission right here, we do need to activate the actual switch to open up the door to able to meet up with the forms of that familiar enemy from the likes of the forms of sense in Big Boo's hut in Super Mario 64 / Super Mario 64 DS, as we expect at this point. But here's the catch though, we need to acquire Mario for this, thanks to the forms of his cap, by the way. So just to ensure for the fact that if we dare try to able to meet up with the forms of Mr. I as Yoshi, I don't think it's going to be that effective, at least as far as we do realize. So, but anyway, although I would have liked able to explain something else for that matter though, but there's technically though, one last thing I want to mention, and that's what appears to be for the fact that, well, obviously though, is about the fact that recently though, speaking of the forms of the Nintendo Switch 2 itself, basically though, did you guys know that Mario Smash Football, or Super Mario Strikers, did somehow recently got added onto the forms of the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack. And no matter what though, and something tells me similar to the forms of how it does it on, well, let's just say, The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker, just before the title screen opens up, it no longer shows us the forms that Derby, or Dorby, Pro Logic 2, logo anymore, just because, well, at that point, much like in Super Mario Sunshine for the likes of the 3D All-Stars version, I'm pretty sure. So with that being said, folks, is that we get the ending stuff at this point right here. So join me next time for some more of Let's Play of another Super Mario 3D, a ROM hack of Super Mario 64 DS, is that we're about to be continuing exploring through the second world and grab more Power Stars. So I'll see you guys until tomorrow. Later, fellas.